and psychology, right? So we're sort of looking at what developmental stage is the child at? How are they thinking about the world and themselves? What are they able to learn at this age, and what are they maybe not quite ready for cognitively or emotionally? And I work with families to really understand how a child learns best, right? So sometimes that's through assessment and interviews and observing them at school, really getting great information from their teachers and the people who know them best. So sometimes it's an assessment situation. Sometimes it's counseling. So I do some counseling. I work with groups of kids and individual students, looking at anxiety, issues with depressed mood, navigating conflict, dealing with hard transitions in life, and this strange sort of undiagnosable situation we have going on with COVID, right? It's sort of crisis, it's sort of trauma-informed counseling, but it's been going on for a long time. So it's sort of a bizarre situation, but it's one that I think educational psychologists can be helpful with, because we really look at the child in context, right? And try to help families also understand what their child needs at any particular point in time. So I also consult with schools throughout the Bay Area. I really miss being in schools. I'm really happy to be with you all tonight. I wish I could be in the same room and see all of your faces, but I really appreciate everybody carving out the time to really pause and think about our own wellness as parents and caregivers, and think about how we can be there for our kids. Parenting adolescents is always challenging, and we've got this whole other layer of uncertainty and stress with COVID. So what I'd like to invite you to do in terms of participating, I'm a little bit new to this webinar format, but I would love if, as you're comfortable, if you would offer up your insights and any questions you have or thoughts through our Q&A feature. So it doesn't have to be a question, but because we're in webinar, they tell me the chat feature is not accessible to everybody, but I believe the Q&A feature is. So as Jill and I are talking throughout this session, if something really resonates with you, or you have, a bit of sage advice to share with other parents, or you just want to empathize with other parents, please type those into the Q&A, and Jill and I are going to monitor those throughout and try as best we can to read those to you, because we're really hoping, in these efforts to kind of bridge between the wellness team and myself and your PTO, to create some connection and community for you as parents. So I invite you to do that, and not a requirement, but you may want to have something just to jot some notes down with you, some takeaways. Like Jill said, the recording and the slides will be available for you, so don't feel like you need to, quickly take copious notes, but if you want to have something nearby just to write with. Our agenda is, I am going to sort of model for you and invite you to do what we call in social emotional learning an emotion check-in. So we're actually going to pause and think about ourselves. We're going to be selfish for a minute and think about how we're doing. And I'll walk you through that. We're going to review and learn some new ways that you might be able to engage and even connect with your adolescent. And through that Q&A feature, and kind of in conversation with Jill towards the end, we're going to do some Q&A and just share some wisdom and resources that we've found in our work that we think can be helpful to you in your family life. So our first sort of interactive activity here is, I would love for everybody to just take a minute, maybe take a deep breath, even close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that, and just think about the words and the feelings that come to mind when you think about being a parent during COVID. And we maybe will look at a couple of these and read them aloud. It looks like we've got almost 90 people logged in, which is exciting. So know that if you're with us tonight, you're in good company with a lot of really engaged parents in your district. That's fantastic. But what are the words? What are the feelings? What are the sort of phrases that come to mind when you think about being a parent during COVID? I'm also curious if our sound has improved, if people can hear us a little bit better. Don't be shy. Go ahead and type those in. So here are a few starting to come. Sad, scared, proud, grateful.
Wanting to have support. In the chat. We have worried.
Oh, we do have chat feature. Okay.
You have some in the chat. Yeah. So we have worried, hard, roller coaster, difficult, stuck, stressed, cooped up and short-tempered.
Frustrating, more worried, a lot of anxiety related feelings, loss of patience. Yeah, thank you. And I should say, you know, these are, they're anonymous, right? So we'll just read what you write and not your name. Exhausting. Yeah. Thank you guys for writing these. More time together with my son. Yeah. More time together. Is that blessing and curse some days, right? So when I ask students to tell me how they're feeling during the time of COVID, a lot of times they're having a hard time identifying and labeling the feeling, right? And there's a lot of layers of feelings going on. But what we can try to help each other do is when we take a moment to really think about how we're feeling, we say this with younger kids, that you name it to tame it, right? The idea that when we can label an emotion, it becomes a little bit more manageable, a little bit more intellectual. And it actually really, we know, activates our prefrontal cortex, that part of our brain that helps us plan and manage things and handle these big, strong emotions. And it takes us away from, it actually deregulates the amygdala, which is a really primal center part of our brain that's so tied up in emotion. So if we can take a minute and actually label it, identify it, right, that's sort of a first step. So when I ask kids, these are some of the emotion vocabulary that they've come up with in the last couple of months. A huge range, right? You see this huge range. So when I was thinking about this session tonight and talking with some folks from your district, right, there's such a range of experience, and yet there's also some commonalities, right? And one of the things that's common is that we're all having this big range of very strong emotions. So this is what students were coming up with. One way that we do a check-in that I do with clients in my office, counselors do this with your children, is sort of a number line, right? You can use metaphor, you can use numbers, you can use colors, all different things like that, but it helps us kind of wrap our heads around how we're actually feeling, because it's kind of a loaded question these days, right? And in our culture, we so often say, how you doing? Great, fine. And then we just keep going, right? And we're not really ready for an answer that might be more intense or might require a little bit more time. And sometimes our kids don't want to tell us how they're feeling, but sometimes just giving a number, right, is a good way to go. Sometimes kids will be willing to do kind of like an up, middle, or down, right? But that's one. Another one is that I love to give you an opportunity to think about is thinking about our emotions as weather, right? What is the climate like in your household right now? How was it this morning? How is it going midday? How's it going now in your household, right? What's the climate? And how might that be impacting the thoughts you're having, your mood? Is everybody experiencing the same emotion right now in your household, or is everybody in the same physical space but having a little bit of a different experience, right? So when we do these check-ins with, you know, clients and students, we're giving them a chance to really kind of look inward and reflect and think about what they might need. It also gives us a clue about how they're feeling and what they might need. And even just by taking the time to do it as teachers and as parents, we're telling kids that their feelings matter and that we actually want to know, right? So you may have a teenager who's not going to want to do this, and that's okay. Maybe you start with younger children first, but I just wanted you guys to sort of see the idea of putting emotions to different metaphors, and that there's different ways of talking about feelings without saying to your child, I really want to talk about your feelings, because a lot of times teenagers are not gonna take that bait, right? A couple other ways that I do check in with middle school and high school students. These are a few that they really like. Middle schoolers in particular like the happy and crappy. Curious if you guys have any that you use in your families. Type those in if you know of any other ones. I really love Rose and a Thorn and a Rosebud because it gives us some optimism, right? It's like, what's something great that happened today that we can be grateful for? What's something that was maybe less than great? And then what's something I'm looking forward to? Or what's something that gave me a little bit of optimism or inspired me today, right? And sometimes, some days we got to look deeper for those than other days. So that's kind of the idea of check-in. Some families have rituals where they do that, in the evenings or once a week, but just the idea of how you can check in with your kids. So now we've done check-in, I want to talk a little bit about the context that we find ourselves in and how this is impacting us as adults. And then we'll talk about how it's impacting our adolescents. So the ongoing stress of the pandemic, right? It's a really strange thing because we feel like in some ways we know we're in this crisis. We hear the word pandemic, and yet the word pandemic has also almost become normalized, right? Whereas a year ago, if you saw the word pandemic on a screen, or the way CNN loves to do it in giant red letters, it really created a lot of anxiety. And now we're sort of like, well, it's the pandemic. And so sometimes our anxiety goes up and down, and we've kind of normalized to that. But it is a level of, higher stress than typical times, right? And when we have that chronic stress that's sort of unrelenting, we know that we tend to feel more fatigue, regardless of how much sleep we get. It is fatiguing to be under constant stress. We have shorter tempers. We have these changes in appetite and what is often referred to as sort of cognitive fog, right? So you may be experiencing this either at work or, at home, and you might see it in your teenagers. Just things slowed down a little bit, right? Not really seeing super clearly, not seeing the forest through the trees, thinking that things used to be easier and why can't I just get this done more efficiently, right? And that's the effects of chronic stress, right? And our perspective can really become a bit skewed. We also know that chronic stress is exhausting, right? And when we're exhausted, we tend to be less thoughtful and less strategic in our relationships, right? Whether there's health uncertainty, financial strain, the stress about just decision making, the decision fatigue, right? Of, how do I keep my kids safe? What's the right thing to do right now about this or that or the other thing? What's a healthy risk to take? What's worth the risk? And those kinds of things can really take a toll on us. And I think it's really helpful when we're in that stressful time and our perspective is getting really skewed to remember that parenting actually is not a job. It often feels that way. We talk about it like it's a job. It's referred to as a job all the time, but it's actually not a job, right? It's a relationship. So I think if we can think about it that way and make it a little bit less about the checklist and a little bit more about how we are relating to our kids, and what's getting in the way of that, that can help, right? And it's a relationship, meaning that it requires communication, empathy, right? It's not transactional. Sometimes it can feel that way. But, again, when we're tired, it's harder to relate to others. So I think it's really awesome that you all are here and you're spending the time, probably at the end of a long day, really just thinking about how can I engage and connect with my teenager? How can I be strategic about it? Because it's harder to do when we're stressed, when we're tired. So another thing I think can help us as parents amidst sort of this chronic stress is thinking about the narrative that we have going on in our heads, right? What is the story you're telling yourself? There's some great authors and podcasters out there talking about this right now. And the idea is kind of, we all have this self-talk going on in our minds all the time. And it can be really helpful. It can be a great pep talk for us, or it can be really detrimental, right? We can be really hard on ourselves. So this is just a little visual here of a young student doing an exercise related to this idea of kind of these inner voices we all have going on all the time. And with young kids, we talk about, think of a time you did something a first, like the first time you rode a bike, or the first time you went on a sleepover, or the first day of school. What were the feelings you were having? What were the thoughts? Kind of those layers of feelings. Maybe it was excited, but also anxious. You were proud, but you were also sort of scared. And we talked to them about what their friendly voice was saying and maybe what their unfriendly voice might have said, right? So that friendly voice is like that inner ally saying, like, you got this, everyone's going to be really rooting for you. And that unfriendly voice may be like, oh, you always blow it, or here we go again. So I think it's helpful with young kids all the way up through adults, right? To be thinking about, what are those internal thoughts you're having, and are they helpful to you right now, or are they bogging you down? Are they getting you stuck, right? And if we can try to sort of nurture our inner ally, right? Part of it is trying to be around people who are positive, listening to things that are positive, having some good humor in your life. If there's a fun show that you enjoy watching and a great podcast, or something like that, right? But also, you've got that inner voice. So how can you tell yourself, I got this, or today's a new day, rather than I'm such a bad mom, I blew it again, right? So that's that idea of positive self-talk. So the next thing is sort of this idea of kind of clearing away the noise and really trying to focus in on what are the things we can let go of, and what are the priorities, what really matters right now, right? So you heard a lot of talk, I think, about this more March, April, May, let's worry less about school and more about our health and safety right now. And now that we're coming up on almost a year, right? There's, people have gone through a college admissions season. People are worried about academics and all those kinds of things. And those things matter. I'm not going to say they don't matter. They absolutely do. But I still think, as much as we can, at least once or twice a day, trying to clear away the noise and really focusing in and reminding yourself and your partner, if you're parenting with a partner, getting on the same page about what really matters to you, so that when the things that are creating conflict in your household come up, they're put in perspective, right? This is a long crisis, right? And then what matters in tough times is having perspective. And when it's been going on this long, I think it's hard to get back to that perspective and to keep deciding that these are the things that really matter, right? And really, kids cannot focus on their education if their health and their safety and their relationships are not taken care of. Those have to come first. So, there's a lot we don't know about how this is going to impact our kids and the screen time and, what the colleges are going to say about all this. There's a lot we do know, right? And let's capitalize on what we know. We know what protective factors are for young people, really for all of us. So this is I love this visual. It comes from the California Surgeon General's COVID-19 playbook. And I think it's kind of fun that she called it a playbook, but I'm a fan. So she has created, I think, a really accessible, practical guide you can find on the website, the Surgeon General's website. I've linked it at the end of this presentation. It helps you make a plan that's realistic for your family, looking at kind of these big 6 protective factors, and gives some practical tips for just making little changes, right? And if all 6 feel too overwhelming, pick one. Pick one, pick 2 for a week, show this wheel to the family, right? And talk about what could we do, right, as a family. Another visual I just love, this is from Brooke Anderson. She is an organizer and a photojournalist. She wrote this way back in March 2020. She writes for Greater Good magazine. It's affiliated with UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, another fabulous local resource. And they've got a lot of great online things, really cool research about happiness and the way that when we spread good and serve others, what that does for our mood and our well-being. And anyways, I could go on about them all night. But Brooke made this list of 6. And again, if the 6 feels like too much, pick 2. Pick 2 or 3. I highly recommend getting your own magic Post-it, right? Not fancy. It's so powerful. It's the gem of the Post-it. And putting something like this on either your bathroom mirror, the cabinet in your kitchen that you tend to go to the most frequently. I know which one mine is. So this was on her keyboard on her laptop, right? Just reminders, these things that we sort of know or we've been told are good for us. The research really backs it up that they are in all times, and during tough times, especially so, right? So this first one, what am I grateful for today, right? There's going to be some days when we got to dig deep to find that, and other days when we are feeling the blessings, right? And we've heard, I think, a lot over time about, practicing gratitude, and it's such a good thing and we should all do it. But if you've never had a gratitude practice before, how do you get into that? How do you start that? And Jill and I were talking about this the other day. We're both are big fans of this idea of 3 good things. Pretty recent study, but an old practice, and a lot of research has been done about it. But I love this one because it's with healthcare workers, right? And we're all either we've got friends who are healthcare workers, loved ones, or we're thinking about them all the time and how they're, dealing with really intense situations. So for this study, they had them just spend 10 minutes each evening. I think it was for 2 weeks. Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was for 2 weeks. 10 minutes each evening. Write 3 things down that happened that were good. Don't have to be huge or profound. Just 3 good things, 3 blessings, and what contributed to it or what was going on in the environment, right? So what they find is a month later, all the way up to an entire year later, that small intervention had an effect on improved happiness, work-life balance, and reducing burnout and depression, right? So we try to encourage adolescents to do this. Sometimes I just ask them to do one. Just try to get them to write one. I love encouraging people to just actually hand physically write it on a Post-it or a journal or something like that. Kids always tell me they want to text it to me. That's fine. Let's get the foot in the door and we'll start with the text, and then at least I can monitor and I know they've done it. But I just encourage you, maybe with somebody in your household or with a friend, you can do it with somebody who's even far away from you, to take a little bit of time at the end of the night, even 5 minutes, jot something down and share it with somebody, have a big impact. So we go back to these 6. I also really love her number 3, right? What am I letting go of? Because I think it's been hard to really sort of practice that, what can I control and what can I not control, especially with a teenager, when maybe they were younger and not so long ago, you felt like you had more control. And, what can we let go of? And back to that idea of kind of the focus and clearing out the noise of maybe what doesn't matter so much today or right in this moment. What can I let go of just for today or for this week? And really focusing on the care and the health and the relationships in the family, right? Okay, so that is maybe my favorite Post-it of all time. So before we sort of shift into talking about how we care for our kids, just to end on, kind of self-care and self-compassion as parents, is to just have this reminder to be kind to yourself. Like Jill said at the beginning, this is a tough time to be a parent, and there are a lot of resources to you in your district and out in the community that Jill and the other folks at the school can help connect you with. So really please don't hesitate to reach out for those for your own well-being as well. So let's shift a little bit and look at this context for our kids. How do we help them cope with what's a really challenging situation that they find themselves in? I just love this picture. Wouldn't we love to all see our kids and students having this sort of casual walk down the hall and interacting with one another and, being able to just be the kids that they're supposed to be at this age and have their teachers monitoring their behavior during the day instead of us monitoring their behavior during the day. We'll get there. We'll get there. This is long. It's temporary. It's coming. But these sort of casual interactions, right, that kids are used to having. I mean, there's their sports teams and theater and all those things they haven't been able to do, but it's also these informal opportunities to socialize, right? So those connections and opportunities really have faded. So while for a long time, experts and people like me have been giving parents advice throughout middle school and high school to start backing off, right, and being less kind of a manager of your kids, that really as adults, as their teachers and counselors and parents, we got to get more strategic and kind of put our fingers in it a little bit more to help them keep up their connections, right? And sort of coach them and maybe think creatively and brainstorm with them about who they could reach out to, how they could get together with some people safely. Maybe thinking right outside of their immediate community, or maybe it's a neighbor down the street that they haven't connected with in a while, but who they could see safely outside. But I just wanted to bring up this idea of, even as maybe some sports start to pick up again, right? We've moved out of purple tier, that we're still missing these informal interactions, right? And that's really their lifeblood, especially at this age in their development. And for parents too, right? We're not seeing each other at school events. We're not, for parents of younger kids, we're not seeing each other at drop off and pick up. And really thinking about, is there a creative way? I think, was it number 2 on the post-it? Who am I reaching out to today? And that can be hard when we're under stress and we're tired, finding the mental energy to reach out to somebody you haven't connected with in a while. But I bet if you've done it, you didn't regret it, right? If you thought about calling somebody or you thought about texting them and you kind of sat on it for a while and then you finally did it, that little interaction is such a mood boost. It is such a boost. So, maybe it's brainstorming with your child, who did you used to chat with who you haven't just reached out to in a little while? Could you send them a text? Could you guys Zoom? Could you get on Discord? There's a lot of controversy around Discord, but I do think it can be a positive social connection. So just thinking also, right, about how as adults, we can find creative ways. I've been working with a couple of schools who have done like affinity groups where, parents who have recently moved to the district get on a Zoom every other week, or they do a dad's group on a dad's freshman or something every other Friday morning or once a month or something like that. A virtual book club. Are there ways, kind of through your PTO? You've got phenomenal leadership in your PTO. Are there some informal ways to sort of nourish the adults, but that also helps with the connections for your kids too, right? I thought I would share with you quickly just some student voices. So this was published in December. The data came from November. So, take that, I guess, sort of in mind as we're looking at some of the statistics. But the National Education Association and the National PTA surveyed about 1,800 students across the country. Public school students, grades 7 through 12. I'll just give you a minute to sort of look through these. Right, so again, we've kind of got this wide range of experience, right? And just wanting to be sensitive to that, right? Some are really struggling. Majority report doing okay. So 58% of this sample said they were doing well academically before COVID. 32% say they're doing well currently. I don't know if you've done a local survey or anything like that. I was just talking to some of the wellness folks about, kind of what they're seeing. They seem to have a great pulse on your district and kind of what the needs are. I love this. 88% trust their teachers, right, to teach them this year. 76% believe they're getting a good education, and they recognize that their teachers are in a really tough spot, right? They're old enough to be able to take some perspective there, and they do really appreciate what the educators are doing for them. I'm going to skip that one. So I was really also encouraged to see this, right? So with, the news cycle layering so many stories of conflict, there's also been a lot of stories of optimism, and especially with the younger generation, right? And some mental health professionals were really concerned last summer about kind of the layering of COVID stress and anxiety with the social justice movement. I actually push back a bit against that a little bit. I think it's a great time for kids to be active in social justice and to be learning about politics. I think it gives them a passion and a sense of purpose, right? And when they feel passionate about something, they come alive. They kind of get out of themselves and their own world and their own situation, and it broadens their perspective, if they feel that they can be active and be a participant, right? So if your child's really interested in politics, interested in the Black Lives Matter movement, different causes, check in with them and see if they feel like they have a way to act. They may need help sort of finding ways to be of service to others, ways to engage with those communities so that they're not just absorbing the news cycle, but that they feel like they're contributing to change, right? So a lot of the data is hopeful. Not all of it is. Some of you might have seen this actually was in a New York Times article this morning talking about the mental health crisis for teens that did not start with the pandemic, definitely a situation that's been there beforehand, and sort of lack of capacity for services and things like that. But the emergency department visits have increased significantly. This information is a little bit dated, but I think we can assume it's probably consistent or potentially increasing further. We need to be vigilant, right? We need to all commit, right? It takes all of us to be really observant of what our kids are going through and be available to them, right? Be proximal. I say proximal, even if your child is not spilling their heart out to you and telling you all of their thoughts and feelings, knowing that you are there unconditionally for them is what counts, right? Even being in the same room, working on different things, I think is fantastic. What we want is to be decreasing that sense of isolation with everybody in their own room with the door shut, right? And increasing a sense of connection, because that's super protective in this time. So I call it proximal, like you don't have to always be doing something together, but just being together. Yeah. So another New York Times, I should have a variety of sources, but it is another New York Times article that I think was from October of 2020. Again, saying, hey, we really need to put emotional needs at the forefront and really be paying attention to our kids, checking in with them, trying to talk with them, being available. So just sort of looking at the time here. I'll touch on these quickly, and then I think, Joe, we can kind of go into the next portion. We look at motivational theory. So I get a lot of referrals for kids who were pretty motivated before COVID, and they feel their parents and teachers are concerned about their mood and their motivation right now. And self-determination theory is a really kind of nice way, I think, to break down what can go wrong with motivation. So the three basic needs that we all have, so goes self-determination theory, are autonomy, competence, and connection, right? So these needs have to be met in order for positive motivation and for us to be resilient. So when we look at what each of these are, right, and you can sort of imagine how these get a little bit thwarted during COVID and with school closure, kids want a sense of independence. They want to feel autonomous, right? They want to feel like they have some control and some choice over what's happening in their lives. They want to feel capable and competent, right? So that's where we kind of want to put the challenge right at their level or just a little bit beyond. Teachers call that the just right level. And relatedness. We need to feel like we belong. We need to have connection to others. So for most kids, going to school and the activities that they were part of were largely meeting a lot of these needs, right? And so if you think about, how your teenager might be behaving right now, I show this to you not necessarily with a task that you're going to meet all of these or fix all of these at home, but just kind of having, right, some empathy that the sources of these things for them have been really greatly reduced. And are there some creative ways that we could give them some autonomy? Like, could they go somewhere on their own? Can we trust them enough to be safe and mask up and be distanced and actually get out of the house and go and do something? Can they challenge themselves, and take on a new skill? I just had a client who decided to take up rock climbing. So the rock wall opened up and they're able to do that masked and distance and everything now. And that's just a goal that they set, and they're feeling really confident because they set the goal and they're feeling capable there. And we've talked a lot about relatedness and connection. Okay, so I think this is the last slide I'll show. And then Jill, if we want to sort of go into the Q&A and talk about kind of more strategies for when you actually engage with your teenager and what, what you might say and not say. But this is a framework that I'm using with a lot of families in my practice now, right? Sort of getting away from, what does the parenting book tell me, or what's the right answer, or what does this theory say? What's everybody else doing? How can I get an edge during COVID? And going over to that right side of, let's slow down and think about, what do you and your family and your child really need right now, today, tomorrow, in the next week? And again, putting that well-being at the forefront rather than the checklist of to-dos. Yeah, okay. So Jill, so we've gotten some questions ahead of time. So thank you to everybody who submitted those. It's really nice to see kind of this level of engagement you guys have in your district. And I'm gonna let Jill maybe look through some of those, and we'll start doing that.
Sure. So a couple of things that came up on our previously submitted questions, which Katherine and I, put some thoughts together for those, but also some things that have come up just since we started our webinar, is a lot of isolation, questions on isolation, and questions about screen time, and also how to sort of tell the difference. Like, is this sort of the feeling of depression that many of us feel because of isolation and because of COVID? Or is it because there is something actually going on in my home? And, not having hope in the world right now, I would say, is a fairly normal response to what's happening right now, because we've just been put in a position where we have everything is unpredictable. We don't have things necessarily we don't have the things that we used to have to anchor on to. And so not having hope in the world at large, whether that is, our government or our country, or like epidemiology in general, the more macro perspective related to the collective trauma that we're all going through, I would say is a very normal response to this. That's a different sort of perspective, as opposed to I have no hope in my own abilities and my own value and my own trajectory, which could be a sign of something maybe going on. But it's, that macro micro perspective, I think is just important to remember.
So I thought I would just share a quick slide for you guys about symptoms, because I get a lot of questions about this too. What's sort of typical, even before COVID, what's typical teenage angst and moodiness versus depression? Sort of when do I call in the experts? When do I just sort of let my child have space and be moody? And there's a lot of great online resources you can find too for sort of depression screeners. But these are the big ones, and you definitely don't need to see all of these, right? But I think a big one here is sort of loss and interest in things that they used to enjoy, which naturally shifts in adolescence also. So it makes that's a nice little piece of the puzzle there, right? They're not going to have the same interests and hobbies as they had when they were 12 as when they're 15. But are they finding enjoyment in a variety of things, or is it just one thing or nothing? Well, they tell you nothing's going to change their mood. So there's a list there. And I really like what Jill said about, that sort of, angst or despondence about kind of the world and kind of questioning the world, especially after January 6th and the attacks on the Capitol. I had a lot of students who were thinking, well, if that's not the bottom, what is? And having all these existential thoughts, right? But they themselves still had a pretty good sense of themselves. They still felt optimistic about their own future, and they still felt capable in their own abilities. They were feeling depressed about what was going on in Washington and feeling a bit helpless about that, not about their own efficacy. And we know there's lots of different causes, right? Overlapping. None of the COVID doesn't fit neatly into any of these. We know others down at the bottom, right? Chronic stress, isolation, rejection. But absolutely, if you are having questions about it, you, like Jill mentioned, there's so many people for you to reach out to in your district and just run it by them, right? This is kind of what I'm seeing. Should I be concerned? And let them ask you sort of those expert follow-up questions to get a sense of the duration and the intensity of the symptoms, right? To help make that clinical judgment so you don't have to decide that for yourself as a parent. You can also talk with them. Teenagers these days have pretty good knowledge about, what is mental health. And if they've been feeling depressed, they might have even looked up for themselves. What are depression symptoms? They're getting education about mental health in health classes. So you might say to them, even really forwardly, I'm wondering if you might be depressed, or you think you might be depressed. And they may tell you. Okay, do we want to do another?
Sure.
Anything else you want to say?
So as I said before, a few things have come up about socialization. And we had a question of a student who had stopped socializing and really only interacts through video games. That there's a big concern over the impact of just the lack of in-person interaction. And that some students some people are actually becoming afraid to leave their home and to go out and just feeling like all of the health warnings and everything, of course, while important, are also contributing to just increasing anxiety.
Yeah. Oh shoot, your sound just faded out there for a second. Yeah. So you're saying kind of after this long of sort of being told it's not safe, and then we try to tell them, let's go for an outing. They might look at us like, well, wait a second, you and the news and my doctor have been telling my school, been telling me for a long time that it wasn't safe to go outside. Yeah, and I saw the questions too, right? About, if they're only engaging with friends online, is that a problem? Should we sort of be making them do some in-person things? It's connection's so important. And I think, like I said before, Discord and online gaming can be beneficial, right? If there's sort of a check and balance on if it's getting in the way of any other interaction, right? And if it's getting in the way of, if it's causing intense irritability when you finally cut it off, and I think starting small, if you and your family really have been in a very small bubble or have not been leaving the house, starting small and seeing a close family friend first outside, masked, and talking to your kids of all ages, they can handle it, about what the research says about outside being double masked, what the new CDC guidelines are showing, right? To give them a sense of the very low risk, right? Rather than them feeling like as soon as they leave their house, they're opening themselves up to a really dangerous situation, kind of what the risk meter is, or even a visual for that, can be helpful. If it's a walk down the street or a walk, if they're not leaving the house at all, starting really small, let's go outside and wave across the fence to the neighbor. It's kind of like exposure therapy, right? When people have different phobias, you really start small and really gradually, and you kind of let them set their own goals for what they're going to do that way. I don't know, Jill, if I fully answered that one. There was sort of like some tech,
Yeah.
but so, socializing.
Yeah, and I also think that all of this has, we've been doing this for about a year now. And again, we've had these same messages, like it's not safe, it's not safe, it's not safe. And so it's going to take a little bit of time to unravel. As we hopefully maybe kind of sort of get back into, a place of a little bit more normalcy, there are going to be some effects of it. And it's going to take a little bit of time to unravel because it has been developing over the past year. So, those feelings of anxiety of maybe leaving and seeing a friend or, with all the protections, it's going to take a little bit of time. And so just to, if you do have, if your child is very anxious about that sort of thing, like just reassuring them, like, that's okay. It is going to take a little bit of time, and just to keep your expectations.
And I think, if in your gut you think that what's going on with the anxiety in your household might be more intense than what other kids are feeling, right? It's something to reach out to folks about, to talk to family, friends, a professional, and just say, this is what I'm seeing, what do you think? Or if you try a couple of these tactics to try to bring your child out of the house and you see that there's real fear there, right? That might be a time to reach out to somebody.
So we also had some more questions just about balancing technology, and because school is online right now, our whole lives are in front of the screen right now. And so how is there, what kind of balance can there be? And, taking away privileges it looks very different now because they have to have the screens, for school and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that came up in some questions.
Okay. Yeah, well, and that kind of makes me think in two directions. So one is from dialectical behavioral therapy, if anyone's familiar with DBT, the idea of radical acceptance, which is kind of like I mentioned before, the things we can and cannot change, right? There's a certain amount of technology.
Como mencioné,
Oh. There's a certain amount of technology and screen time they're going to have right now, and we don't love it, right? That's putting it lightly. We don't love it because as our children were younger, from the time they were basically in utero, our pediatricians and everybody was telling us to keep them off of screens. And now they're on screens all day. So it goes against our instincts. It goes against what we've been taught as parents, or we've read as parents, and what our friends have shamed us about, like, oh, you let your toddler watch TV, whatever. It is what it is for now. And I don't say that to be callous at all. But everybody is in this situation. They're spending time on a lot of time on screens. Having nice breaks for them is, I think, really helpful to mitigate this. Actually walking outdoors for 5 minutes in between classes, getting up and leaving the chair. They might not be willing to do, boot camp virtually, but they might be willing to get up out of their chair and go check the mail, or get up out of their chair and walk with you to the end of the street. For their physical health, their mental health, and it does mitigate the effects of the screens. So that's part of it, is I think just accepting the situation we're in as it is what it is. It's temporary, everybody's in it. But then also that just because your child is a teenager doesn't mean that you can't set some limits and some non-negotiables. And I'm working with quite a few families right now who had kind of gotten to the place where they felt like they could step back and they felt like they could let their child set some more of their limits and make mistakes and manage their own time and see what came of it. And they're finding now they're having to step back in, which is creating conflict, right? And again, I really don't mean to sound callous because I have so much compassion for it and I've been through it. But that is the situation we're in. So avoiding the conflict and not setting limits is going to create more problems. And I really encourage people to, figure out what about the screen time is really your priority. Is it a particular game you want to limit? Is it do you want to just get them up and moving a little bit more, but the actual time doesn't need to decrease? Is it that you're going to decide at 11 p.m. or midnight that tech comes out of the bedroom, period, no questions asked, right? And some people are saying, oh, well, they need their tech to do their homework. Not after midnight. They've got a lot of time at home and all day long. And if you're finding that there's so much work that they're doing their homework after midnight on a regular basis, I'd say that's a question to bring to the teacher or to the counselor and to talk to your kids about what's not working in their schedule and their time management, right? So there is, even though they're at a certain age, it does not mean that you cannot set limits. They can still have a sense of autonomy and independence and being a teenager with some limit setting. And if you need some help doing that, people like myself and Jill and a friend, a family member can help you do it. It's hard to do alone. Get on the same page. If you're co-parenting with somebody, get on the same page with them too. Because as soon as you put a limit in, there's going to be conflict and you want reinforcements and you want to partner in that.
Yeah, and I think the idea of boundaries is so important right now, because our boundaries, for those of us who are working at home, which is many of us, and for all of the students who are going to school at home, your desk is in your bedroom, which is your school, and so I have conversations with students all the time about like their commute to their bed to their desk and how different that is. And so creating boundaries, even if it's something small, and in terms of electronics, I think is important if that's accessible to you. I have heard a lot of parents talk about how, well, they need their phone in order to do their assignments. So it is more convenient to do their assignments on their phone, to take pictures and things like that. But if you are finding that that there is an issue with the phone and limits and not being able to do their assignments, talk to their teacher about that, because there should be a fairly easy workaround. Whether it's the teacher or the counselor or somebody at your school, if you're finding that that's an issue, please reach out to the school, because the work should be able to get done without a cell phone. That should just be the case no matter what. Like I said, it's a little more convenient that way, but reach out to the teacher. All right. So another thing, and this is something that comes up with my students all the time, is it's just motivation and feeling just like, what's the point of doing this? And I know I have a lot of work to do, and it's piling up, and I just don't have motivation. I don't like distance learning. I don't feel the same connections. This is something that I speak to students all the time about. Just them feeling really, really stuck. And I think that a lot of the things that Katherine said about self-care can really, contribute to the success of that. And so having certain kinds of routines in place, and having things to look forward to. I had a conversation just yesterday about like, what are you looking forward to? Like, what does motivate you? Because motivation can feed other motivation. So if you're excited about something, because sometimes we're in this space where we just don't want to do anything, or we're just not excited about anything because we can't do very much right now. But if there's something that you can feel excited about, even if it doesn't have anything to do with school, even if it has, like, you really like painting, that's great. Tell me about that. And to sort of move towards that, because if you can get excited about something, it's possible that you can carry that over.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it makes me also think about, again, kind of that idea of intervening, right? Where your kids feel like you're micromanaging or you're interfering, but you actually are just trying to help get them back on track, right? If you see your child's motivation really suffering during this time, you know, this is something where I think, is this the slide? Yeah. So this parent's role, right? So Michael Rivera is just an awesome educator and psychologist, right? And he talks about when we're younger, we're kind of our kids manager, and we're kind of hovering and arranging play dates and all that kind of stuff, picking their schools and their classes and whatever. And then we shift to consultant, where we're along, you know, beside them, or even one step back, and we're there as sort of a sounding board, but we're not directing their lives, right? We go from having control to having influence. But this is tricky during COVID, because your child may need some more managing than consulting, especially if you see them really going off track, you know, and you're like, well, do I just let them fail this class, right? Or do I step in? And I think when it's tricky like that and you're not sure which role it is, it's all about the delivery, right? So do they feel like they have sort of a parent policing them, or do they feel like they have sort of a cheerleader? And I think, in order, even if you feel like you're cheerleading, right, kids will say like, oh, my parents are intervening. I said, no, they love you and they're trying to help, right? So there's that miscommunication. I think you have to be really explicit. I think you have to say, look, let's sit down, let's talk about this at a calm time, not during the conflict. The next day, this seems to not be working. Seems like you're having a hard time. I want to help. How can I help? Right? So you're coming at it more from that consultant, where you're asking questions and you're kind of guiding their thinking. And you might say to them, you know, I'd like to help remind you, but I don't want to be a nag. I don't want us to fight, but I notice this, this, and that. What do you think? How could we kind of break the cycle and get their thoughts so that you get their buy-in to how you're going to change the schedule? Because a lot of times when the motivation's low, it's procrastination, right? And then the parent walks by the bedroom and sees that they're still on Twitch or whatever, and they get frustrated, and then it's just conflict, because the kid's feeling guilty too. They know they're putting it off. They know they should be doing their work, and they feel ashamed that they're not meeting your expectations, and they feel, you know, they know they're disappointing you. They're disappointed in themselves. So I think having that heart to heart and trying to find a way to enter in when you're calm, to say, you know, you're not a little kid anymore, and I know you don't want me to interfere all the time, but I'd like to help. And I'm here. Your teacher's not here. You know, you're stuck with me. We're under this roof. How can we work together, and how can we help each other? And just having that explicit conversation can be a real game changer. Yeah. Oh, and maybe I'll just share this one. So this is, yeah, one of Michael Rivera's quotes, right? So he says, we need to rethink the old metaphor of separating from our teens, right? And replace it with the concept of extension. So, you know, they're extending away from you, right? But you can still be connected. They can have some independence, but still be really connected to you and need you. And juggling both of those at the same time, I think, is that really delicate balance during adolescence. What other questions do we have, Jill? I'm going off on a tangent.
We have some questions about routines and about how we can, you know, creating how the routines are all off, and that it seems very difficult to get back on track because of the continued lack of, you know, structure in days, that sort of thing. So yeah, how to promote a healthier schedule.
Muted, sorry. It kind of makes me wonder, for the people who wrote these questions, you know, how off the routines are, right? Like, what's the new normal? Are the routines so off that the total number of hours of sleep is not enough, right? And we know that kids this age need between 8 and 10 hours, and most of them are only getting about 6. So, you know, even pre-COVID, most teenagers were chronically sleep deprived and not at their cognitive and emotional best. But, you know, I guess part of the questions I would ask parents in this situation is, you know, let's look at how off the routines are. And again, can you start small and let go of maybe some parts of the routine you don't love, and focus on what's the one thing you really want to change, or the one or two things. You know, is the routine interfering with mood, schoolwork getting done, things like that? Or is the routine just a strange sort of adaptation to what we're doing right now? Some people are eating meals at all kinds of weird times a day and, going to bed earlier, later, whatever. But then again, like limit setting, these non-negotiables, you can still have some influence over that routine. If the sleep really is disordered at this point, I have some students sleeping in like 2 and 3 hour increments, and they tell me, well, overall, I got 9 hours. But they're sleeping for 2 hours, awake for 4, sleeping for 2 hours, and they're just sort of a mess emotionally. I think consulting with your pediatrician is a great way to go. I think looking at interventions like a mild dose of melatonin, dare I say, but consult with your pediatrician about it. But trying to get the sleep back on track is going to help the rest of the routine. Scheduling things like a meal at a certain time, it's hard to sort of commit to. And in my own family, I'm afraid to commit to a particular dinner time, but I give us like a 45-minute-ish window, so it's flexible. But everybody knows around that time is when dinner's going to be, and it just sort of anchors the evening a little bit instead of it being totally open, right? There's no real goalpost, right, in our week and in our days and evenings without scheduled events. And so if a mealtime can be scheduled, I think that's one way to help with the schedule. Yeah. And I think, like, again, that same strategy of, hey, I'm noticing all of our schedules have just gotten really off. Can we sit down and just think about, like, what's one little change? Like, here's what I'm going to do, right? Like, I've been staying up too late watching whatever. So this week I'm going to, and kind of modeling for them that you're willing to make one change to have a bit of a healthier routine can be helpful.
We had a question about kids who are struggling socializing. And so, my student has less social interaction, has difficulty socializing prior to this, and socializes on games on Discord, but is still lonely. What kind of things could the school do to kind of help with that? So it's a really good question, and it's something that I can speak for my Aragon that we work at, or that where I am, is that there's been some effort to try to get students to join groups and to try to be able to socialize with one another in a group setting, albeit virtual. I will say that a lot of students are kind of over being on screens if they don't have to be. It's a difficult sell sometimes if it is coming from the school. But I would still say to contact your school and see if there's anything in particular. I know that there are certain groups at schools that wellness counselors are running that are very specific to some of the student needs. And so I would definitely reach out to your school and ask what's available, because connection through video games is something that's very important to a lot of students. It is a way for them to connect with other people, and it may not be necessarily the way that we would, or the way that maybe other children would, but that is something that has been a good connection for some, for a lot of students, even if it's not maybe the most ideal circumstances.
Yeah, and depending on your comfort level and your family, as we come out of Purple Tier, more organizations and places are starting to offer small groups and outdoor activities. So it might be a good time to kind of revisit the idea of, with your kids, if something were open, or even giving them a choice list. Like, I found these couple of things, like, could we pick one? As those start to open outdoors, because it changes, right? It changes all the time, what's available. And it might be that, something through their gym or their soccer club or your church or something that wasn't available 2 weeks ago is starting to open up now. And that the thing that you think that they would never do, they'll surprise you and be willing to do. So I wanted to make sure that we got to kind of those, like, conversation starters. Is there a question that you think relates to those? Because I want to make sure we answer people's questions too.
I did just want to share a comment that I found amusing and that I say to my students and my children is that sometimes, we're in this position, and as a therapist as well, you want to give advice and you want to have, give feedback and make sure that the student is being heard and all that. But that sometimes you just have to say, like, listen, yeah, this is terrible, isn't it? Like, this is no good. I'm quoting.
Yeah.
But that, this is just so hard, and it's hard. Yeah. It's hard for me too, and I get it. And sometimes it doesn't always feel so satisfying. But sometimes just like sitting in that uncomfortable place where you don't know what to do, but sitting together can be very healing. It can be very, like I don't have the answers for my, my students who have certain things going on, but I will sit through the sludge with them, talk them through it, without creating any huge solutions, but just like someone to like push through is really meaningful. It really does matter.
Yeah, it's sharing the burden, right? And when our kids are younger, we get advice that we're supposed to tell them, like, we got it, and like portray confidence, and that our kids are looking to us and we need to be strong. And as they get older, they really value us leveling with them. They know things are not great right now. So if we continue to sort of put on a super sunny, rosy facade, it's not that we don't want to try to be optimistic and help them see the bright spots, but they really will appreciate you leveling with them and sharing with them if there's something you're struggling with too, so that it's not just them. So I put this slide up that's sort of like something I use with parents, the keys to entry, right? How we can sort of come from a place of curiosity, rather than judgment or giving advice, right? We want to give advice, we want to fix. And sometimes when we give advice, we're giving kids that sense that they can't solve it on their own. So kind of the consultant model, right? Some of these questions you could ask these about different games your kids play that drive you crazy. Tell me more about that. Even, fake it till you make it, get interested in what they're interested about. But I think coming from curiosity, right? We know we get a lot more successful with teenagers when we take a curious approach rather than that judgmental approach. I also wanted to show you guys some of these. I don't have a great acronym for remembering them. If anybody has one and you want to send that to me, that's great. But I think these are sort of the go-tos, right? Of what we want to try to do and try to be. And it made me think of it when you said, like, this just sucks. Like, when we're acknowledging how they're feeling, you may just say, like, I know this is horrible. I wish you could go to school too. It's just awful. I think they'll really appreciate that. So acknowledge, appreciate, apologize. The repair is huge. We didn't really have a question about that, but I hear that with parents all the time. They're like, well, it's too late because, last week or last year or last month, they were really upset with me because I did X, Y, or Z, and I feel like I ruined our relationship. There is opportunity for repair. They will forgive, right? If you own it and say, I blew it, or, I said the wrong thing. Compliment, that can be challenging, right? With our teenagers, sometimes when their behavior seems really challenging, but really trying that old 5-to-1 ratio where you've got 5 positive things that you throw at them for every 1 correction or negative interaction, try to find a compliment. Talked about being curious. And, Jill just said it well, you model that vulnerability, like just not knowing, just saying to them, I don't know. And that's okay. It's uncomfortable, but it's okay. We'll get through it. I just don't know.
We had another comment that was submitted previously talking about how kids are often way more flexible and resilient than their parents. And maybe it's because they're not the decision makers as much and they don't have that pressure. But what can we learn from our kids, which I thought was a great question. And, I think about how that prefrontal cortex has not been developed, which is why, we don't always understand all of the decisions that our kids make because their brain isn't quite there. But that lack of long-term thinking, or at least the lesser ability of long-term thinking, maybe that actually is somewhat beneficial in this because, we think so much long-term, like what are the long-term effects? How is this going to be? What does this mean for college? What does this mean for school? What does this mean for their ongoing development?
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of these kids are going to get through this much faster than we will. Their resiliency is very high. And so, the long-term planning part of their brain might not be there, but maybe that's somewhat of an advantage right now. I don't know. I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, they are the invincibility factor, I think, was scary for a lot of parents of adolescents initially when they all thought, well, I can't get COVID. It doesn't apply to me. But now that sort of invincibility and optimistic thinking, and that they're just in the here and now, it does have a silver lining for them for sure, right? They're able to not, go doom and gloom thinking about what this is going to mean for their future. There are some kids I know, in this age group who are really feeling that and stressing about what it's going to mean for their college career and future. But yeah, I think overall the optimism of that age group is a real asset.
Yeah, and I just think that their ability to rebound is better than maybe we think it is, and that despite that they might be taller than you, they're still children. They're still kids, and so they are going to be able to rebound and like move towards normalcy, because it it is going to shift and move. I tell my students, I can't tell you that it's going to get better or everything's going to be perfect and all that. But what I can tell you is that what we can rely on is change, and it will change, and we will do the change. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but the idea is to access that resiliency to move through the change. Because that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I do think that they are. I do think they are resilient, and I think that there's a lot. I think that there's a lot there to look forward to.
Yeah.
So on that, do you think it's about 8:30? I'm just giving you guys the 5 minute.
Sure.
That's such a positive, what a positive way to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just gonna put up a quick slide at the end here of just some of my favorite things and kind of what's been inspiring me lately. And I would encourage you guys to, kind of maybe create little, like within your PTOs at your high school or something like that, and just send each other messages, right, of things that you either read or watch that bring you humor or that give you a little inspiration as a parent, right, or ways to commiserate. I've got a group of 4 or 5 women, and we just kind of send each other little things like this. But these are some of the things I've been reading and listening to lately that I'm loving. So I thought I would share those with you all. And Jill and I were talking the other day about, when you can find a funny podcast that also gives you a little inspiration and also gives you a little bit of practical parenting advice. It's a win-win. And so that's the Armchair Expert there with Dax Shepard. Jessica Leahy's a fabulous author and wonderful speaker. You guys might be familiar with her. But she was on Armchair Expert, right? So there's just kind of these creative ways to mix your entertainment with getting a little bit of parenting inspiration too. Just wanted to share those. And then this last resources here, and these will be in the slide deck. Some really rich information and really accessible websites there for you guys to see. And each of these, CHC has a new podcast out, which is great. Challenge Success is doing some parent webinars and things like this. They actually did one this evening, the Well Balanced Student. So I think that'll be up on their website from Challenge Success. And when your kids were younger, you might have been familiar with Common Sense Media, but they actually have quite a few resources for older students and kind of navigating the gaming world, different mindfulness apps for kids 13 to 18. So if you haven't checked out Common Sense in a while, they actually do have some good stuff for older kids too. Yeah, okay, I think that's,
All right, so again,
Somebody just asked, how do we get a copy of the slide deck? Is that going to be posted on our district site?
I don't.
This will be uploaded. The video will
Yeah.
be uploaded. So people will be able to go through the video.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, the accessing the video will be
On the
way to
San
access
Mateo
the slide deck.
Union High School district site.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, you know, if you want to talk to anybody in your school, if you have any questions about any of the mental health services or anything, you know, else, again, go to our website, wellness counselors pictures. We're all there, all 35 of us or something, including our management, right on the front of the district page. And so please go, please ask questions, please reach out. And you know, again, there's we referrals, we can connect you to different things. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and also check out the Parent Connect group, which is also on our website. And again, if you're interested, just contact someone at your school. Someone will be able to help you.
So every high school in the San Mateo Union High School District has a wellness counselor available.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you guys so much, Dr. Katherine Peterson. This was so helpful. Jill, Ma, as usual, this was just really wonderful. I think a lot of people learned a lot tonight and are feeling a little bit less alone. This has been great. Thank you so much. Thanks to all our interpreters. Thanks to April Torres for everything she's done, and Dr. Skelly for his continued support. We really appreciate it. And we're so grateful to be in this community with all these caring and wonderful people and all you great parents out there. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.